Hey there, welcome back to Story Slices, where we slice through the best Reddit tales just for you. Let's dive right into the first story. The first one is the Tittle story, and it starts like this. I never thought I'd find myself in a battle with a homeowners association over my right to live in my own property. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. This is the story of how I ended up locked in a ridiculous feud with an HOA Karen who tried to ban me from staying in the cabin I rightfully owned. It all started about 2 years ago when I inherited a small cabin from my late uncle. The place was nestled in a beautiful wooded area about an hour outside the city, where I lived and worked. My uncle had used it as a weekend getaway spot for years, and I had fond memories of visiting as a kid. When I found out he'd left it to me in his will, I was thrilled at the idea of having my own little nature retreat. The cabin itself was pretty modest, just one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a cozy living area. But it sat on a decent-sized plot of land with some gorgeous old growth trees. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had sentimental value, and I was excited to fix it up. At first, I just used the cabin occasionally on weekends, much like my uncle had. I'd drive out Friday evenings after work, spend Saturday hiking or fishing, and head back to the city on Sunday afternoon. It was a nice change of pace from my usual routine. But as time went on, I found myself wanting to spend more and more time at the cabin. My job had recently shifted to allow for remote work, and I started toying with the idea of living at the cabin full-time. The peace and quiet of the woods was so much more appealing than my cramped apartment in the city. Plus, with housing costs skyrocketing, it made financial sense to live in a place I already owned outright rather than keep shelling out for rent every month. So about 6 months ago, I decided to take the plunge. I gave notice at my apartment, packed up my stuff, and moved out to the cabin. The first couple months were great. I set up a little home office in the spare room and settled into a new routine. During the day I'd work, taking breaks to step outside and enjoy the fresh air. Evenings and weekends were spent exploring hiking trails, learning to garden, and slowly fixing up the cabin. It wasn't always easy. The internet could be spotty, and I had to drive into town for groceries. But overall, I was loving the simple life. That is, until Karen entered the picture. I should probably back up and explain that the cabin was part of a loosely organized community of similar vacation properties. There were maybe 30 to 40 cabins spread out over a few hundred acres. Most were only occupied on weekends or during summer vacations. A lot of the owners were retirees who came up from Florida to escape the heat for a few months each year. When my uncle first bought the place 20 years ago, there wasn't really any formal HOA. The property owners had an informal association that mainly dealt with things like maintaining the private roads. But in recent years, a more official HOA had been established. My uncle never mentioned it to me, and I honestly didn't pay much attention to it at first since I was only there occasionally. Big mistake on my part. I should have read through all the bylaws and regulations as soon as I inherited the place. But I was grieving my uncle's death and excited about the cabin, so I put it off. That oversight would come back to bite me. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early spring when there was a loud knock at my door. I was in the middle of a work call, so I quickly muted myself and went to see who it was. Standing on my porch was a woman who looked to be in her 60s, with a blonde helmet haircut and an impatient expression. "Can I help you?" I asked, a bit confused since I rarely got unexpected visitors out here. The woman pursed her lips and looked me up and down disapprovingly. "I'm Karen Johnson, president of the Pine Lake Homeowners Association," she announced in a clipped tone. "And who might you be?" I introduced myself and explained that I had inherited the cabin from my uncle. Karen's frown deepened. "I see. And how long have you been staying here?" she demanded. I moved in full-time about 2 months ago," I replied, still not sure where this was going. Karen's eyes widened in obvious displeasure. "Full-time? Young man, are you aware that Pine Lake is a vacation community? These cabins are not zoned for full-time residency." I blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, what? This is my property. Are you saying I'm not allowed to live here?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Karen snapped. "It's clearly stated in the HOA bylaws that these are vacation homes only. No full-time occupancy allowed. You'll need to vacate the premises immediately." I was stunned. This woman was telling me I couldn't live in a cabin that I owned outright? It made no sense. "There must be some mistake," I said. "I inherited this place from my uncle. I have the deed and everything. How can you tell me I'm not allowed to live in a property that I own?" Karen sighed in exasperation, as if explaining something to a small child. "Ownership is irrelevant. When you bought into this community, you agreed to abide by the HOA regulations. And those regulations clearly state that these are vacation properties only. No exceptions." "But I didn't buy in," I protested. "I inherited the place, and my uncle owned it long before there was an official HOA." "Doesn't matter," Karen said dismissively. "The rules apply to all property owners, regardless of how or when they acquired their cabins. Now, I'll give you 48 hours to pack up and leave. After that, we'll be forced to take legal action." With that, she spun on her heel and marched back to her car. I stood there in shock, trying to process what had just happened. This woman had shown up out of nowhere and told me I had to leave my own home in 2 days? It was insane. Once the initial shock wore off, I went inside and started frantically searching for any HOA paperwork my uncle might have left behind. I found a folder with some documents, but nothing that specifically mentioned restrictions on full-time residency. I needed more information. I called my cousin Alice, who had helped handle my uncle's estate. Hey Alice, it's me. Quick question. Do you remember anything about an HOA or restrictions on living at the cabin full-time? Alice sounded surprised. An HOA? No, I don't think so. Uncle Jim never mentioned anything like that. Why do you ask? I filled her in on Karen's visit and ultimatum. Alice was as baffled as I was. That doesn't sound right at all, she said. Let me dig through the estate paperwork and see if I can find anything. In the meantime, don't let that woman bully you. It's your property. After we hung up, I did some Google sleuthing on HOA regulations. From what I could tell, while HOAs did have a lot of power to create and enforce rules, they couldn't retroactively apply new restrictions to existing properties without owner consent. If my uncle's cabin predated the HOA, it should have been grandfathered in. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to stand my ground. The next morning, I got a call from Alice. I looked through everything, she said. There's nothing in Uncle Jim's papers about an HOA or any restrictions on living there full-time. The only thing I found was an agreement to pay annual dues for road maintenance. That's it? This confirmed my suspicions that Karen was overstepping. I thanked Alice and asked her to email me copies of all the relevant documents, just in case. As the 48-hour deadline approached, I braced myself for another confrontation. Sure enough, right on schedule, there was another knock at my door. This time, Karen had brought reinforcements, a balding man in his 50s who she introduced as Steve, the HOA treasurer. Well, Karen demanded, have you made arrangements to vacate the premises? I took a deep breath. No, I haven't. And I'm not going to? Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. Excuse me? I thought I made myself perfectly clear. You are in violation of HOA regulations. You need to leave immediately or face legal consequences. I'm afraid you're mistaken, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I've reviewed the paperwork for this property. There's no mention of any HOA restrictions on full-time residency. This cabin was owned by my uncle long before your association was formed. You can't retroactively apply new rules without my consent. Steve shifted uncomfortably, but Karen was undeterred. Nonsense. All properties in Pine Lake are subject to HOA regulations. No exceptions. Can you show me where exactly it says that? I asked, because I have the original deed and purchase agreement right here, and there's no mention of it. Karen sputtered indignantly. Well, that is, Steve? Show him the bylaws. Steve reluctantly pulled out a binder and flipped through it. Karen, I'm not actually seeing anything specific about prohibiting full-time residency. Just some vague language about maintaining the vacation character of the community. Karen looked like she might explode. This is outrageous. You can't just move in here full-time. What's next? You'll want to start a business? Build an extension? Where does it end? I was starting to lose my patience. Look, I understand you're trying to preserve the character of the neighborhood, but this is my home. I own it outright. Unless you can show me something in writing that specifically prohibits me from living here, signed by either me or my uncle, then I'm not going anywhere. Karen turned to Steve. Call our lawyer immediately. We'll see about this. Then she stormed off, practically dragging poor Steve behind her. I breathed a sigh of relief once they were gone, but I knew this wasn't over. Karen clearly wasn't the type to back down easily. I needed to be prepared for whatever she might try next. Over the next few days, I didn't hear anything further from Karen or the HOA, but I could feel the tension in the air whenever I went outside. Neighbors who had previously been friendly now avoided eye contact. I overheard whispered conversations that abruptly stopped when I approached. It was clear that Karen had been spreading her version of events throughout the community. I felt like I was living under siege in my own home, but I was determined not to let her bully me into leaving. A week after Karen's second visit, I got a certified letter from a law firm representing the Pine Lake HOA. It formally accused me of violating community regulations and threatened legal action if I didn't vacate within 30 days. I'll admit, seeing an official lawyer's letterhead made me nervous, but I reminded myself that I had the facts on my side. I scanned the letter and sent it to Alice, asking if she knew any good property lawyers who could advise me. Fortunately, Alice had a friend from law school who specialized in real estate disputes. She agreed to look over my case pro bono as a favor to Alice. After reviewing all the documents, the lawyer confirmed what I had suspected. The HOA had no legal grounds to evict me. Based on what I'm seeing, your uncle's property should be grandfathered in, she explained. The OA can't retroactively apply new restrictions without the owner's consent. As long as you continue paying any agreed-upon dues for shared expenses like road maintenance, they can't force you out. Armed with this legal opinion, I drafted a response to the HOA's lawyer. I laid out the facts of the situation, included copies of the original deed and purchase agreement, and firmly asserted my right to live in the property I legally owned. I sent copies to Karen and Steve as well, hoping this would finally put the matter to rest. I was wrong. A few days later, I was woken up at 6 a.m. by the sound of an engine. I looked out the window to see a tow truck backing up my driveway, with Karen supervising. What the hell? I threw on some clothes and ran outside. What do you think you're doing? I yelled. Karen smirked triumphantly. Enforcing HOA regulations. All vehicles must be registered with the association. Your car isn't, so we're towing it. I was dumbfounded. Are you kidding me? I live here. Where exactly am I supposed to park? Not my problem, Karen said with a shrug. Should have thought of that before you decided to squat here illegally. I was furious, but I knew losing my temper wouldn't help. I took a deep breath and addressed the tow truck driver directly. Sir, I'm the legal owner of this property. This woman has no authority to have my vehicle towed from my own driveway. If you take my car, I'll be forced to report it as theft. The driver looked uncertain. He turned to Karen. Lady, is this true? I don't want no part of stealing somebody's car. Karen's smug expression faltered. Of course it's not true. He's violating HOA rules. We have every right to tow unregistered vehicles. Yeah, but if it's his own driveway? The driver said doubtfully. I don't know about this. I seized the opportunity. I have documentation proving I own this property. Would you like to see it? The driver nodded. Karen started to protest, but I ignored her and went to get the papers. When I returned, I showed the driver my deed and ID. After reviewing the documents, the driver shook his head. Sorry ma'am, I can't tow this vehicle. Homeowners' rights supersede HOA rules. I'm out of here. As the tow truck drove away, Karen looked ready to explode. This isn't over? She snarled before storming off. I breathed a sigh of relief, but I knew Karen was right about one thing. This wasn't over. Her failed towing attempt was just the beginning of an escalating campaign of harassment. Over the next few weeks, I was barraged with a series of increasingly petty HO violations. A $50 fine for improper lawn maintenance because my grass was half an inch too long. A warning about unauthorized exterior modifications when I replaced a broken window. A noise complaint for allegedly playing music too loudly. At 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, a demand to remove the bird feeder in my backyard as it wasn't an approved design. Each complaint was pettier than the last. I knew Karen was just trying to make my life miserable enough that I'd give up and leave. But her tactics were having the opposite effect. They only made me more determined to stand my ground. I meticulously documented every interaction and piece of correspondence. I took dated photos of my property to disprove her claims about violations, and I continued to assert my rights as the legal property owner. The situation came to a head about a month after the towing incident. I came home from a grocery run to find a group of people gathered in my driveway. As I got closer, I realized it was Karen, Steve, and several other neighbors I recognized as HOA board members. What's going on here? I asked warily as I got out of my car. Karen stepped forward, a gleam of triumph in her eyes. We're here to inform you that the board has voted. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises, or we'll be forced to change the locks and remove your belongings. I stared at her in disbelief. You can't be serious. That's completely illegal. You have no right to enter my property or touch my belongings. We have every right, Karen insisted. As president of the HOA, You are not above the law, I interrupted firmly. I've consulted with a lawyer. You have no legal grounds to evict me. If you attempt to enter my home or remove my possessions without my consent, that's breaking and entering. I won't hesitate to call the police. Some of the other board members exchanged nervous glances. This clearly wasn't going how Karen had told them it would. Now, I continued, I have been patient. I have tolerated your harassment and baseless complaints. But this is where I draw the line. I am the legal owner of this property. I have every right to live here. Your HOA has no authority to tell me otherwise. I turned to address the rest of the group. I don't know what Karen has told you, but I urge you to think carefully before taking any illegal actions. You could be opening yourselves up to serious liability. A murmur ran through the group. I could see uncertainty on several faces. He's bluffing, Karen snapped. He has no proof. Actually, I said, reaching into my car, I have quite a bit of proof. I pulled out a folder containing copies of all the documentation I'd gathered. The original deed, property record showing my uncle's ownership, predated the HOA, the lawyer's opinion, and a log of all of Karen's harassing actions. I'm happy to share copies of all of this with each of you, I said. I think you'll find it paints quite a different picture than what you've been told. I'm not looking for a fight. I simply want to live peacefully in the home I own, but I will defend my rights if necessary. The other board members clustered around, examining the documents. Karen tried to interject, but they waved her off, engrossed in reading. After a few minutes, Steve looked up with a troubled expression. Karen, did you know about all this? Why didn't you tell us the property predated the HOA? Karen sputtered, her composure cracking. Well, that's not relevant. He's still in violation of our rules. Rules that legally don't apply to his property, another board member pointed out. Karen, you told us we had clear authority here. This is a mess. We could be sued for harassment, someone else chimed in. Or worse, if we had gone through with changing his locks. What were you thinking? As the group rounded on Karen, I quietly excused myself and went inside. I had made my point. Now I just had to wait and see how it played out. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Steve standing there, looking sheepish. I owe you an apology, he said. We all do, really. We had no idea about the full situation. Karen, Well, she wasn't entirely truthful with us. I nodded, appreciating his directness. I understand. I'm just glad we got it sorted out before things escalated further. Steve grimaced. Yeah, about that. There's going to be an emergency board meeting this afternoon. We'd like you to attend if you're willing. I think it would help clear the air. I agreed, and that afternoon I found myself in the community center facing the entire HOA board, minus Karen, who was conspicuously absent. The meeting began with a formal apology from the board for the harassment I'd endured. They acknowledged that my property was indeed exempt from many HOA restrictions due to its grandfathered status. We want to make this right, Steve said. What can we do to resolve this situation? I thought carefully before responding. Honestly, all I want is to be left in peace to enjoy my home. I'm happy to be a good neighbor. I'll keep my property tidy and pay my fair share for road maintenance and other shared expenses. But I need assurances that the harassment will stop. The board readily agreed. They drafted a formal statement acknowledging my property status and my right to full-time residency. They also agreed to dismiss all the recent fines and violations Karen had issued. As the meeting wrapped up, one of the board members asked the question I'm sure was on everyone's mind. What about Karen? Steve sighed heavily. Karen tendered her resignation this morning. In light of her actions and misrepresentations to the board, we accepted it effective immediately. There were nods of agreement around the room. It was clear I wasn't the only one who had been rubbed the wrong way by Karen's overzealous approach to HOA leadership. As I left the meeting, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The nightmare of the past few months was finally over. I could enjoy my home without constantly looking over my shoulder. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal in the neighborhood. Some of the neighbors who had avoided me at Karen's urging now made a point to stop by and chat, often apologizing for believing the rumors. I focused on settling into the cabin and continuing the renovations I'd started before all the drama. As spring turned to summer, I planted a vegetable garden and built a small deck off the back of the house, projects that probably would have given Karen an aneurysm. One sunny Saturday afternoon, I was out front splitting firewood when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. To my surprise, Karen got out. I tensed, wondering if she was here to start trouble again. But as she approached, I noticed something different about her demeanor. The haughty, combative attitude was gone. She looked almost contrite. Hello, she said hesitantly. I was hoping we could talk. I nodded warily. Sure, what's on your mind? Karen took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. My behavior was inexcusable. I let my position go to my head and convinced myself I was acting for the good of the community. But really, I was just being a bully. I was taken aback by her frankness. This was not the Karen the first I'd come to know over the past few months. She continued, losing my position on the board was a wake-up call. It made me take a hard look at how I've been treating people. I'm not proud of what I saw. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. It couldn't have been easy to come here. Karen shook her head. No, but it was necessary. I wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry for all the trouble I caused you. You have every right to live here and enjoy your property. We talked for a while longer. Karen explained that she'd started seeing a therapist to work on her control issues. She was making an effort to mend fences with other neighbors she'd alienated over the years. As she was leaving, Karen paused. I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think we could start over? Maybe someday be neighbors in the true sense of the word? I considered for a moment. I think that's possible. It'll take time to rebuild trust, but I'm willing to try if you are. Karen smiled, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from her. Thank you. That's more than I deserve, but I'm grateful for the chance. As I watched her drive away, I marveled at how much had changed in just a few months. What started as a nightmare of HOA overreach had led to positive changes in the community. Karen was working on becoming a better person. The HOA board was taking a more measured, homeowner-friendly approach, and I had gone from feeling like an outsider to truly being part of the neighborhood. I turned back to my woodpile with a sense of contentment. This place that I'd inherited from my uncle had become more than just a cabin in the woods. It was my home, hard-won but all the more precious for it. As I breathed in the fresh mountain air, I silently thanked my uncle for the incredible gift he'd given me, not just the property itself, but the chance to put down roots and build a life here. The sun was setting as I finished up my chores for the day. I settled onto my new deck with a cold beer, watching the golden light filter through the trees. In that peaceful moment, all the stress and drama of the past few months felt like a distant memory. I had stood my ground, asserted my rights, and come out the other side stronger for it. More importantly, I'd helped bring about positive change in my community. As I gazed out at the forest around me, I felt truly at home for the first time in years. The cabin was where I belonged, HOA drama and all, and I knew that whatever challenges might come my way in the future, this was a place worth fighting for. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.